I'm sorry. Hello, everyone. Welcome to class. Today we're having property management, managing risk, and personal landlording. We're very pleased to have you. Please enjoy yourself, relax, and really focus in on the information being presented today. We have um, Tanisha Wilson. She's our instructor. She's an expert in the field of all things related to real estate. She's been a broker for many years and she has experience. And she is here to share her personal stories and a lot of insight. And she wants to help to educate everyone in the field of property management and managing risk. Um, Many of you have your kits, your class kits, and you actually will not need them for class today, but we do want you to read chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 before the next class. And thank you for participating, and I'm going to pass over the screen to Ms. Wilson. Thank you so much. Okay, Ms. Wilson.
Hello, how are you? Good evening,
Hi.
everyone. How's it going? I'd like to start with thanking everybody who's present and thanking you for your participation as well as your patience when we had technical problems last time. But I'm sure that everything's going to go well this time and we're going to enjoy ourselves. You should be able to see my screen, and we're on the first screen, which just gives a little introduction of who we are and what we're doing today. This class will give you the ethical expert knowledge of property management, managing risk, and personal landlording. This class will enable you to better manage your personal investment properties, manage the properties of your investor clients, work within a property management company, and have skills and knowledge needed to pursue real estate related administrative positions. These skills are valuable because many people end up in a landlord position, whether they wanted to or not. Some choose to be investors but just don't want to have the hand-to-hand dealing with tenants. There are a lot of variety of reasons why these skills will allow you to make money in property management. And the smoother it goes, the more money you'll make, the more referrals you'll get, and it'll just be a better experience all the way around. Many of us have the opportunity to manage properties without even pursuing it. Just being in the industry, clients will ask you if you could assist. Perhaps someone passed and they inherited property and they're not skilled at screening tenants. Perhaps someone's job has taken them out of town and they don't have enough equity to sell and they need to hold the property for a little while. There are several reasons why someone can land in that position, and as a professional, it's your job to solve their problems and help them with it. So we're going to take a poll real quick. Take a poll to see who's all participating in where we are. Are you ready for the poll, Erica?
Oh, yes. The poll is up. Is everyone able to view the poll on their screen?
Thank you.
Yes, we'll give you just another minute to finish. Tanisha, that was a great point that you made about a lot of homeowners end up in a position where they need to move and they don't have enough equity to sell, because I, like you, have run into a lot of individuals who have ended up being landlords because of that.
Yeah, maybe they don't qualify for a short sale,
Hmm.
or they may have enough equity but still have to deal with the closing costs and
Oh,
fees
yeah.
involved. Transfer tax can make it so tight. They would it's not enough profit for them to sell at this time. But as we know, real estate continues to appreciate. And sometimes if they just hold it one more year or a year and a half, they'll have enough room to sell it gracefully. Or they may even be able to sell it to the tenant that they've been leasing to for a year.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes.
As a professional, we have to provide solutions. And that's what the millionaires of the world are, people who have found solutions to others' problems.
Hmm. I see that 60% of the participants have finished voting in the poll. So I want everyone to participate, because this is a truly interactive experience, and we want you to feel the entire experience that the ethical experts offers. So I'm going to give you a few more seconds and then I'll close the poll. Okay, the poll has been closed. Ms. Wilson, you can continue.
Okay, thank you. We're in chapter 1 now. We're going to do chapter 1 and 2 tonight. And then the following sessions we'll do 2 and 3. I'm sorry, 3 and 4. And then 5 and 6. So the first one is the introduction, of course, and it's getting us familiar with some objectives and some things that are basic. These learning objectives are the primary goals of a property manager, the importance of the owner's objectives, classifications of real property, the effects of federal laws on property management activity, and the protected classes under ADA, ECOA, and the Fair Housing Act. The first primary goal of a property manager is to preserve the property and to know the owner's objectives. The owner's objective may be subject to their own lifestyle or their own needs, and that contract that you have with them should customize and detail what their objectives are. Some homeowners may need you to rehab a house, or they may need you to do minor repairs, and some may not want you to do repairs at all. Some of them just want you to collect rent or find tenants, or a combination. It could be a la carte where you do one or two of the things, or a full service where you do all of them. You may have an investor who's out of the state or out of the country, and you're doing everything from finding the tenant and screening them to collecting a security deposit, doing repairs, installing fixtures or carpet. Or you may have a homeowner who's right here in Michigan, right here in southeastern Michigan, and just type B personality and don't want to deal with the tenant, have no clue of selecting tenant. I've had a few clients where they actually knew the tenant and didn't want the tenant to know that they were the owner. In an effort to remain anonymous, they hire a property manager to take care of those duties of collecting rent and drawing up the lease agreement. I have other clients where they remain anonymous and appear as a maintenance man, and no one even knows that they're the owner. They do all the maintenance, but I do the leases and collect the rent. There are some situations where um, the owner may want you to do a rehab on the property so that you can get it ready for a tenant. But any objectives that the owner has and you have a clear understanding, you should put in writing a property management contract. And there should be some templates of those. If not, then your broker or I can always help you draw up something custom. So knowing the importance of the owner's objectives is what happens in effort to keep a happy client and get referrals. We're also going to go over the classifications of classifications of real property, the effects and laws, and some protected classes. The property manager manages the property on the behalf of the owner for compensation. And that's pretty much a general description of the things that are done as a property manager. The primary function, again, is to achieve the owner's objectives, to generate income for the owner, revenue, and preserve or enhance the value of the property. Now, as far as whether you're helping them to get homeowners insurance or helping them to pass an inspection, helping them to evict a tenant, all of those things have to be detailed in your contract to determine which things you're doing as customary and which things you're doing complimentary or for compensation. As far as the duties of a property manager, the state laws do vary, and we're primarily going to discuss Michigan. Now, it also varies depending on whether you're representing an individual, a corporation, a fiduciary, or government owners. And let's discuss those different types of owners. The individual could be John Q. Public, your neighbor, member of your church, a member of your alumni, an individual homeowner or person who is asking your assistance as a professional to preserve their property and increase the revenue on it. A corporate entity would be a situation where either a corporation hired you to manage one or more properties, or a corporation has property in their inventory that they need you to assist with getting rid of or managing until you sell it. A fiduciary is a situation where you may be in charge of a property for a court, for probate court, or for someone who's operating under a trust agreement. A government owner will be a situation where either the government has a building that they rent out to veterans, or it could be a building that you're managing for homeless people. It could be a government office where there are tenants that are offices and businesses that assist the government and work in tandem with them. But in each situation, you are working within the owner's goals. And it's your goal to do the things the owner needs in effort to be profitable. So one of the classifications of real property that's very popular that we all are more familiar with is residential property. Single-family home, manufactured home parks, multi-family residence such as two-family flats, duplexes, four families, and facilities for the aging. Managing those type of properties are the most common and the simplest. You'll have opportunity to do those very frequently. Commercial property can be a little bit more complicated. They're definitely involved with producing income. If it's an office, they may provide a service. A retail may provide a product, need inventory and storage. Then there's research and development where they will have labs. And again, here we have a liability alert that we must comply with ADA, that's the American Disabilities Act. The building may require retrofitting, such as handicap access, railings in the bathroom, wider doors. And the manager is usually responsible for compliance. With industrial property, you have to consider heavy manufacturing, light manufacturing, industrial parks, many storage facilities, and other things. And when you're thinking about industrial properties, now what's become very important is the environment. Do they have toxins? Are they going to damage the soil? Are there underground storage tanks? Do they have to be removed? Those are some of the things that you get involved with industrial property. And if that's the case, please do your research, because as a professional, you will be held liable, and that could be expensive if you have to clean up an oil spill, or if you have to get rid of some materials that were left by the previous tenant. Um, and you may have to hire someone to assist with removal of toxins, or even just asbestos being removed from pipes. So those things are something you really need to be an expert on. And if you get involved with that, be sure you do some research. Say, for instance, it was a clinic and they had old needles that are not clean, that should have been hauled away. Those are some things that need to be considered. Waste management, having a contract with the city or a contract with a private company to remove waste in a proper manner. And those mini storage facilities, you can get into a situation where you're changing locks often, and you're concerned as to the safety of things you're storing for other people. And there's some other situations for industrial property. Does anyone have any examples or questions on that? Okay. We'll also discuss special purpose property, where there are activities specific to a building, like a theater, Masonic Temple, the Fox. And then there's some examples here of hotels and motels, where it is a landlord-tenant situation, but for a certain time period, not a month or a year, but only for a night or a week or so. And then there's clubs and resorts, timeshares, nursing homes, hospitals, schools and colleges, which include dorms, government institutions, cemeteries. All of these require different contracts, and each contract will have certain language that pursue satisfying your client in these items, these roles. There are lots of opportunities in niche markets like concierge services. I saw a vehicle the other day that had a magnet on it, and it was called Lisa's Errands. Call me to run your errands. So if you have a property and you're managing it, sometimes there are a lot of small tasks where time runs out and you don't have time for such small things. And you can offer a concierge service or enlist a concierge service to handle small things, like staging the property, having the carpets cleaned or the drapes cleaned. Another niche market is asset management services, where you work for corporate property managers exclusively, or technology experts that know how to store servers and computer equipment. You know, they have to be kept at the right temperatures and handled well and secure. And then there are leasing agents who are usually on site at a facility to lease to prospective people who come in with or without an appointment. And the REO management was popular at the time our market crashed. We all had a few of those. We had contracts with Aquin and what were some of those on the East Coast, West Coast? There were quite a few of them. We did BPOs for them. We changed locks. I kind of got out of the REO management when they decided they wanted us all to put utilities on in our name. And I thought that the cost of that, in my opinion, was extensive, especially since whenever I showed the REO property, there wasn't any power on. Eventually that changed. And then our market started to balance out now. We have primarily homeowners and not REOs. And there's a message here again about a liability alert to be sure you comply with state licensing laws. and attend the continuing education classes to be abreast of all the changes. Our industry is ever changing.
Ms. Wilson,
Yes,
can
ma'am.
I know that a lot of people always ask about BPOs and they're so interested in them. And I know, and I just noticed that you said that they aren't as hot as they used to be. But can you explain to the class what BPOs are and how they're done and how they're not as popular as they were a few years ago?
Yes, I'd be happy to elaborate on that. A BPO is a broker price opinion, and a corporate entity such as a mortgage company who has property in their inventory, or if they have a client they're considering a short sale, they would enlist a broker to do a report on it, very similar to an appraisal. They will ask two or three realtors to do BPOs, usually for about $50 to $100, which is far less expensive than actually hiring an appraiser. And eventually, before the transaction is done, an appraisal is done. But in the beginning, they might just want a broker price opinion where you comparing the subject property to three sold properties and three available properties. And you compare different amenities such as bedroom, square footage, and you make adjustments if you need to. If something is frame or the other one is brick, you make adjustments to come up with the value of the property. And that value is what the mortgage company or the entity need who hired you to give them an idea of what the property would sell for and how long it would take for it to sell. It gives them a snapshot of the market around that property, usually within a half-mile or 1 mile radius, what has sold in the last 90 to 180 days. Those comparables are usually like properties having a similar square footage and floor plan in a similar disposition to support the price that you're recommending. And the BPOs became very popular when our market first crashed because we had so many houses going back to the bank. And it wasn't profitable for the bank to order an appraisal on each one. So to do two or three different BPOs gave them a good idea without spending $400 for an appraisal. And we are doing pretty much the same steps in determining value as an appraiser would do, but because we're licensed as a realtor or a broker or an agent, we're not able to call our report an appraisal. Only a licensed appraiser can call their report that. So that's why our report is called a market analysis or a broker price opinion. And it is a broker price opinion because brokers were supposed to hire agents to do it. However, agents found ways to network with banks and get those tasks and perform those BPOs as well. Traditionally, it should be supervised by a broker, and traditionally, agents may not have access to the same information that a broker can find to do those reports with. But many agents perform BPOs, and the compensation for it sometimes made up for closings that we didn't have at the time the market crashed. We're not having a large request or surges for BPOs at this time because there aren't as many foreclosures as there used to be. There's been a lot of loan modifications. There have been a lot of government programs and community programs that have reached out and helped homeowners to prevent them from losing their home. And a lot of homeowners are not walking away from houses anymore. They don't bury their head in the sand and just run out of town. They're finding ways to either hire a property manager, hire a realtor to sell it. They may have a little more equity than they did 5 years ago. There may be a lot of different programs that they can get involved with to save their home. And the economy is better. The economy is better and people are working again. So there's just not a lot of foreclosures going on. And if a buyer calls and asks you about, can I get a list of foreclosures? They're living in another time frame. That market is pretty much dried up. So I think that explains a little bit about the broker price opinion, the BPOs, and the REO management and how it all tied together during the crash. Our market is ever changing, and you can't really get stuck in a particular niche. You have to be able to be ahead of the trend or at least glide along with the trends because they do change. Just like cell phones, one that you had 5 years ago is no good today. If 5 years ago you lived off BPOs, you have to be doing something different today. One of the best ways to get involved with the niche market is to stay involved with the industry more than just Con Ed, to continue to take classes and go to meetings with your boards and be online and network with other realtors, other people in our industry, because things are always being discovered and shared. Now we're going to get into laws that are applicable to property management. And we're going to discuss the antitrust laws, such as price fixing, shopping the competition, civil and criminal penalties, and corporate fines up to $100 million. When they talk about price fixing, it reminds me of the of the board game Monopoly. Because price fixing is something that was very popular back in the 60s and 70s. Not too much of it's going on now. We all usually charge 6% to list a property. There are some variations if the property price is too low and that's not a fair compensation. And in the property management business, most property managers charge 10% of the monthly rent collected. There are some situations where you can negotiate your fees. You can charge more, you can charge less, depending on different activities or the goals that your client wants from you. And you can also charge in conjunction with the percentage a flat fee or $1 per hour if there's some tasks that are done that's not in your contract. So price fixing is where some people get together and charge a rate that's not good for our industry. I remember when I was at Real Estate One, everyone charged 6% on most properties, and every now and then you charge 7 if it was really cheap, and if it was commercial, you could go 8 or 9. But when the market started to crash, there were some agents that would list the property at 5%. And those of us who were still at 6, we didn't really like that because it made us look bad or greedy. And being at Real Estate One and a regular agent, I didn't have the option to negotiate my commission, and I lost some listings like that. So when they say shop in the competition, that could mean calling around and asking, what's your fee, what's your fee, what's your fee? And choosing someone based on their fee without really thinking about or considering the services that are being offered with it. Because you really do get what you pay for. You don't want to get caught up in those civil and criminal penalties or any corporate fines. We're going to do as much as we can to discuss that and keep you from getting caught up in that situation. The Americans with Disabilities Act is primarily important to commercial properties. It's about public accommodations being readily accessible without regard to disability. So a hotel and who has a bathroom without railings would only be able to serve normal, healthy Americans. But if it were a hotel that had those railings around the tub and extra wide doors, then you know that it's accessible for wheelchairs. Or say if the elevator had braille in it so that a blind person can determine what button to push to go to what floor. Those public accommodations should be adjusted and upgraded by the manager normally And there are different standards for certain facilities. If you were doing an adult foster care, the state would make sure that you were aware of the common things that they look for. If you had um, an adult foster care, you would have to have a special metal door that would lock them out of the basement. And sometimes when you're at Home Depot, you see those guys getting those metal doors and wonder, what are they doing with that? I guarantee you they're retrofitting adult foster care homes. And without being in the industry, you may not know. But being in the industry, I find myself at Home Depot very often. So they're expecting certain things to be accommodated without the disabled person having to make certain requests. Some things just should be available, like handicapped stalls in the bathroom and handicapped parking spots out front. Now that shouldn't be confused with the Fair Housing Civil Rights Act of 1968. And while I'm on this subject, I just want to share with you that I was at a meeting with the Greater Detroit Realtors. And unfortunately, the gentleman speaking gave me some really sad news. He said that right now, home ownership in the United States for African Americans and people of color is less than it was at the time that Martin Luther gave his speech, I Have a Dream. And the reason is because of the crash that we had in 06, 07 through 09, where so many homeowners lost their homes. Many of them have not rebounded, even though they may be working or doing well. It's still very challenging to qualify for a loan to get approved right now. So our home ownership statistics are extremely low, and we have to do some things to get people back in the home ownership goal and mindset in the very near future. The Fair Housing Act is supposed to prohibit discrimination in housing through race, color, religion, national origin, gender, family status, and disability. Local laws may add protected classes. Now, when we talk about these different classes, you may think, oh, well, that's easy. And it is easy for you not to discriminate because you've had these classes and you have been reminded in Con Ed every year. But the client that you represent may not know about this act, and you have to share that with them and not participate in any discrimination. It's your duty to make sure that this client of yours is operating in a fair manner. Believe it or not, there is discrimination that goes on every day. And sometimes you just have to watch your language so that you're not guilty of it. And I want to give you a good example. The biggest one that I come across is the familial status. There are a lot of single women head of households in our city. And there are some landlords that choose to not participate in that type of contract. They don't want to have a contract or a tenant who's a single woman. And you have to be able to counsel your client in a manner that they understand that you can't discriminate on that, because these women need shelter. Now, the homeowner may have their own reasons. They'll say, well, she doesn't make enough money, if something goes wrong, if something is broke, people will break in on her. Those things may be true in their mind, but you cannot decline a tenant's application because they're a single woman head of the household, or a single man for that matter. Now, you may say that the income is too low, or they're not a good candidate, or you found a better candidate. You really have to choose your words very carefully when you decide that this isn't the proper candidate for the house. And when it says local laws may add protected classes, I'm thinking of here where it says gender, where you can't discriminate against men, you can't discriminate against women, but you also cannot discriminate against transgender or gay, lesbian. You just can't discriminate against those protected classes. It prohibits discriminatory advertising. If you're going to run an ad in Craigslist, it tells you certain things that you can or cannot say. And if you do, you will be reported. However, if you decide that you want to put an ad out yourself, there isn't a checklist. You just have to know there's certain things that you can't say. For instance, you can't say family neighborhood and think that that's going to attract other families. Because at that point, unfortunately, you're making a single person feel unwanted when you say family neighborhood. It may be someone who doesn't like children and don't want to be in the area where there's a family neighborhood. Maybe they work midnights and they needed to be quiet in the morning. Kids are outside playing in the summer and that doesn't appeal to them. In your advertising, you can't say certain things that'll offend certain classes. And just knowing the history of how things evolved in the city is why certain laws are in place. There's a neighborhood that used to be called Paradise Valley, and it was around the area where now is Lafayette Park, around 1300 Lafayette, where those co-ops are. It used to be a very thriving Black or African American neighborhood where lots of clubs and businesses that were owned by entrepreneurs. And at one time, they were very profitable. But things changed, and all of the people in that area got displaced. When I-75 came through the urban renewal, they tore down a lot of those neighborhoods, and the people were unfairly treated where they couldn't buy houses. They were forced into the projects, the Brewster projects. I'm sure you heard about them, where the Supremes and Smokey Robinson and all of them were living when they became famous. But Detroit was famous for music before Motown, because that Paradise Valley, or another thing they called was Black Bottom, that area had so many clubs where our people could come and perform and actually use the front door. And it was mixed company then, even before the rest of the city was. But when that area was torn down or razed and our people were displaced, they couldn't move just anywhere they wanted to. There were actual deeds, and I've seen one myself. Deeds had covenants in it that said that this property could not be sold to people of color. I had a transaction on University Street years ago, and everyone involved with the transaction was not like me. And the title company, the seller, they didn't catch that clause. And when the title company sent it to me, I actually read it and saw it there. But because I was the only one involved in the transaction who would be offended, I decided not to say anything. And that deed was transferred still with that clause in there. Traditionally, title companies remove those clauses and you don't have those problems. But they would say things like, well, there are certain townships that were formed on purpose using names like White Lake Township to signify that they didn't want certain people there. And they would use certain phrases like nice clean area in an effort to signify that other people were not clean. So there was a lot of discrimination going on in the 60s and 70s, and even then we still managed to buy houses when there wasn't even FHA loans with 3% down. Back then the lenders could tell you half down or just deny you based on whatever they felt, because you were divorced or widowed or anything they decided to use against you. But now there are civil penalties, and as you can see on the screen here, it's $11,000 for the first offense, $65,000 or more for multiple offenses within 7 years, actual damages, and unlimited punitive damages. You may remember not too long ago, I think it was 2005, in the city of Grosse Pointe, Century 21 was fined. They had so many complaints on them that the state sent testers, posing as buyers to those cities to see if they would, to that city to see if they would be steered or how they would be treated. And I myself experienced racism in Grosse Pointe, representing the client who wanted to buy a house there. Where several times the house didn't appraise, and they used that to get out of the deal and then sold it to someone else. There were times where I would call to set an appointment to show a property, and they would say, "Oh, we're doing some repairs. Call back on Friday." Then you call back Friday. "Oh, it's pending now." When I called on Monday, you weren't showing it. And that happened several times where I would call, say my name, who I am. "Oh, I think that's pending." And it's not. But they would say or do anything to discourage you. "I think they have an offer on that one." You think? Do you know? Can you check? So civil penalties and actual damages, unlimited punitive damages, are actually necessary to ward off some of the discrimination that still goes on today. Is there anyone here who has experienced it recently in the last 5 to 10 years? Have any of you seen, dealt with, counseled someone against, or felt the wrath of any violations of fair housing?
I had a small experience years ago where I was working with a transgender client, and the client was looking at rental property, and it seemed that the owner of the property, they just weren't being that helpful, and they just seemed like they were doing everything to discourage the client from moving forward with pursuing the property. And I felt deep down that that had a lot to do with it.
It probably did. And honestly, if the client makes enough money to pay the rent, and if the client has no evictions in their history, there really isn't a valid reason for the seller to decline unless they have a different candidate. But sometimes a homeowner has fears. They fear the company that someone may bring, or they fear the housekeeping. Um, they just have certain fears, and you really can't operate on fear. You have to operate in good faith and apply fair housing. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act prohibits discrimination when extending credit for a loan or a lease. And it has protected classes as well: race, color, religion, national origin, gender, the receipt of public assistance, age, and marital status. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act applies more so with loans than with leasing. Um, but again, those are protected classes where you can't discriminate against. Now, the one about public assistance, that comes to mind, Section 8. And it has become very interesting. If you're leasing a property and someone calls and says, "Do you accept Section 8?" If you say no, are you discriminating against them because they're receiving this public assistance? But if the homeowner decides that they don't want to participate with Section 8, how do you say that tactfully without being discriminatory? Now, before you answer, let me tell you, with Section 8, they will not allow a homeowner to receive Section 8 monies if the property taxes are not up to date and they check now. So if you have some back taxes that you're working on, made arrangements on, or whatever, they may use that against you and not allow you to participate with this person. And you cannot have it homesteaded. I'm speaking of a client in particular who had a one rental homesteaded in his name, even though all of the other rentals was in his LLC's name. The property that's his primary residence that he lives in, he has allowed his wife to claim as the homestead. So therefore, even though you have the right to homestead one of your properties, he had to remove the homestead after he allowed the Section 8 tenant to move in. Once he removed the homestead status, of course that made his property taxes go up. So now that his property taxes have gone up to a different rate that the homeowner whose homestead enjoys, he's at the rate of an investor. And he had to pay all those taxes up to date. And there were a few other things. Oh, he has to have the certificate of compliance from the city. Whereas if you're renting to a regular person, you may not have that. Then you have to register it as rental property, which is now $150. They're going to come out and inspect. You have to bring it up to code. And of course, you want to bring it up to code with smoke detectors, hand railings, no lead-based paint exposed. But you also have to have the lead-based paint test, which could be $400 or $500 itself. So renting to a Section 8 tenant has become extremely expensive. And sometimes the first payment may take a month or two, even though the tenant's in there, for it to kick in. Now, once it kicks in, you're going to get direct deposit every month. And that way you know you're going to get it. The tenant's going to take care of the property. They don't want to get kicked off. But dealing with it and getting it set up could be frustrating. So for that reason, many homeowners. I'm sorry, go ahead, Erica.
I was just going to ask, how do investors, like with everything that's going on currently in regards to Section 8, how do investors feel about dealing with it as far as their return on investment?
Well, they're very unhappy about the city charging them $150 to have that inspection every year. And they're unhappy about the process of getting it set up, how long it takes for it to get started. And, you know, Big Brother, the government has asked to see your tax roll and know that the tax bill is paid now, when before they didn't pursue that. But there have been so many people who are in the house where the taxes weren't paid and it was sold at auction and it caused drama. So every time there's a rule made or a law made, usually as a result of some drama. And I think that many of the investors experience upfront money when they have to deal with a Section 8 tenant. But as an investor, that means the whole root of investor is invest. You have to put money in it first before you can get it out. And the nature of an investor is to try to put as little money up front as possible. So even though we assume investors have the wherewithal and the money to invest, to bring the property up to code, to pay the taxes up to date, to remove the homestead, it's not always profitable in the beginning. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 years to get a return on their investment. So those protected classes include receipt of public assistance. And age is a factor as well. I can tell you that I would be guilty of that age discrimination, and I have to watch how I select tenants as well. But it's very few months last year in 2015 where I was not in 36th District Court evicting someone. And it's a common trend that the people that I'm evicting are young. And there are a lot of responsible young people. I used to be one of them. So now it surprises me. And my daughter is a responsible young person. So when I meet someone young and I assume that they're responsible, it takes a while of, you know, going to court over and over and over before you can see, well, what is the common denominator here? Well, the common denominator is their youth, their inexperience, and that's all around their age. So where someone else might discriminate against age because they don't like older people, others might discriminate because they don't like younger people. The young may say, oh, well, I didn't know that if I didn't pay my tickets, they were going to put a boot on my car and I couldn't go to work and my check was going to be short, so I couldn't pay you. I didn't know this. I didn't know that. Where if you're dealing with old age discrimination, maybe you might have some other issues where they have just too many rowdy grandchildren over there tearing up the property, and it's not them themselves. But in any event, you cannot discriminate against age, and you just really have to watch your language when you deny someone their application. Are there any other examples of protected class discrimination that anyone would like to share right now?
Well, I actually have one other thing I'd like you to address. Have you ever ran into an issue? I've never experienced this, but I've wondered where it's an issue for someone getting a mortgage that's a senior citizen. Like, have you seen them say, oh, well, this person is, I don't know, 79,
Too
80,
old.
and
I
yeah,
have never had that experience. It has
you
crossed my mind once, but I've never seen anyone deny for that.
okay, well, that is good
Mhm.
then. Okay.
Now we're going to get into the Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act, where the homeowner is supposed to disclose possible or known lead-based paint presence. And you have to disclose that to any residential tenant in a property built prior to 1978. And the reason why it's 1978 is because that's the year that the law was changed. And if you don't comply and use this form and disclose what you know or don't know, you could incur a fine from $11,000 to $66,000. And if you have the lead-based paint certification, that contractor must be certified. There are very few contractors certified in the state of Michigan to do lead-based paint tests. Those who are may or may not have the equipment and may have to subcontract it out, and so that's where the cost comes in. The fines are applied after you've been investigated and the state goes through your file and don't find those disclosures in there. It may be a situation where a lawyer or a community organization is represented for some other reason, and while they're going through the file, they discover, this form isn't here. And sometimes you can be found guilty of any act just because you don't have your paperwork together. So you definitely want to use that form. You definitely want to make sure your client uses that form and disclose. Either you know it's there or you know it's not. Most of the time, we're going to disclose that we have no knowledge of lead-based paint, even though we may assume that there's lead-based paint underneath the different levels of latex paint. You don't know that there's lead-based paint there unless you have a test by a certified assessor or contractor. Once you know, you do have to disclose it. And traditionally, the remedy is to mediate, and that's just to paint over it. There are some situations where a homeowner may have to replace windows if they have the type of windows where it was lead used in those grooves, real small areas they can't get to clean it or cover it up or paint it. So in an older house, that's one of the reasons why it's beneficial to change those windows out, because there was lead-based paint inside the pane, or because it's not energy efficient anymore. But any house built before 78 has the possibility of having lead-based paint. Now, there's possible they could have used oil-based paint back then. There's possible that they could have just put wallpaper up. But more than likely, they did use lead-based paint. Now, since 1978, we stopped using it. It was recalled, and I don't think you could purchase lead-based paint today if you wanted to. So any house built after that is exempt from that disclosure.
Okay, I'm going to launch quiz number 1 and quiz number 2.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, perfect. Um, I'll give everyone a couple of minutes to finish. Okay, about 30 more seconds and we'll go to quiz number 2. Okay, now we're going to go to quiz number 2. Okay, everyone has turned in their quiz. Ms. Wilson, we may continue.
All right. Now we're going to get into Megan's Law. This one's fairly new. It
Ms. Wilson,
requires registration.
I'm sorry,
Yes,
but
ma'am.
I can no longer see your screen.
Oh,
And I,
okay.
I don't know if it's just me, if I may have minimized it, but is your screen sharing button still clicked?
Yes, ma'am. It's showing the screen, and the icon says people can see your screen. Click to stop screen sharing.
Okay, well, it's probably just me. You can go ahead and proceed.
Okay. So Megan's Law requires registration of certain sex offenders, and we want to avoid registered sex offender access to a resident's home. The state has a website that you can go to and click to see if there are registered sex offenders in the area. But once you or your client have that information, you will be required to disclose it if you're aware of it. And if there is a possible tenant who is a sex offender, they would not be able to live near certain schools or have certain restrictions on things that they can do and where they can go. There's a Protecting Tenants and Foreclosure Act now. It protects bona fide tenants in the foreclosure process. And when they say bona fide tenants, they mean tenants with a lease agreement or month-to-month rental agreement. That doesn't mean a squatter. This foreclosure act means that you must allow a tenant to finish their lease, or the new owner must provide a 90-day notice to terminate the lease. So if you acquire a property which has a tenant in it, or if your investor acquires a property that has a tenant in it, and they have a valid lease agreement, you should allow it to end before you take possession or ask them to move. You may want to renew it if they're a good tenant. If you decide you don't want that tenant there, or you want to do something different, maybe you want to rehab it or live there yourself, then you'd have to provide a 90-day notice as opposed to a 7-day or 30-day notice to quit. So again, a bona fide tenant is one who has a lease agreement or property management contract, a property rental contract in writing. There are several situations where a tenant moves out and allows a relative or a friend to stay there until the sheriff comes or until the bank comes. And those are not bona fide tenants. Some of your management duties may vary, and it does require competency. You have to be good at planning, screening the tenant, collecting the rent, obtaining insurance, or referring them to someone where they can seek insurance. You do have to keep accurate records, such as receipts and transaction reports, and periodically report to the property owner. Most property managers provide a monthly statement and then an annual statement. You will want to know where to advertise and market. There's certain websites just for that. You will need to know how to negotiate a lease, assist them with maintaining the property, or take over maintaining the property. And you may even need to assist with property taxes. Just depends on your contract with them. And then the liability alert, it says to evaluate the owner's objections. Owners who milk the property, and some are doomed to financial failure if they have that goal to just make money and not realize that they've been given a charge to provide housing. Now I want to give a few details on some things that are listed here, such as negotiating a lease. Most lease agreements are several pages, and it talks about more than just the lease or rent amount. The lease is the total amount for the whole year. So if the rent is $500, then 5 times 12 months is the amount or the value of the lease. So if that tenant only stays 3 months and move out, you could sue them for the whole amount. And that's why a tenant is always reprehensive about breaking their lease. When collecting the rent, you have several ways that you can send it to the owner. You could send it to them in a wire if they're out of town, but you want to check and see what is the fee to wire money every month. It could be $20 or $10 depending on the financial institution that you use. You may be able to send a personal check. You may be able to deposit a check in their account if they are participating with a local bank. But in any event, however you provide that rent to them, you want to establish that in your property management contract, which means you may need to collect their routing and accounting number. You may need to discuss it with them to see if you want to have a debit card just for repairs. You want to discuss having reserves in an account for them in case you have to board up the property in the middle of the night or snake the drains because it's backed up in the basement. And you may want to have a certain dollar amount reserved so that in case the seller isn't available, you can still handle that situation and not have to tap into your fund. Because after all, that's why the client hired you. If they're on an island somewhere sipping in Mai Tai, they don't want to get a call from you that you need money to plunge a toilet or call a plumber. They want to know that you can handle that. So you should have a minimum of $65 on hand in the reserve for them so that you can handle certain things without bugging them. In screening the tenants, you may want to belong to a certain website like Check, where you can see if they've bounced checks before. Or you may want to have someone at 36th District Court check and see if they've ever been evicted before. There is a terminal on the first floor of 36th District Court where you can put in someone's name and see how many times they've been there, how many times they've been involved in a suit, whether it's small claims court or landlord-tenant. It's just certain things that you should know to do as the expert that a homeowner or a client would not know. There are certain websites that you might want to be familiar with, like RentPro, Craigslist, And when doing those property reports that you send periodically, there are certain books that you can use, ledgers. When you go to court, the judge may ask to see your ledger to accurately display when and how much the tenant paid. You may have software like QuickBooks or RentPro to accurately record the transactions and repairs that you're doing for the homeowner. There are some professional organizations and designations that will assist you with gaining experience, networking, getting mentors, and other people who can assist you with this, like the Building Owners and Managers Association International. Sometimes they have websites, they have conventions. The Building Owners and Managers Institute, the Institute of Real Estate Management, International Council of Shopping Centers, National Apartment Association, National Multi-Housing Council, National Association of Residential Property Managers, National Affordable Housing Management Association. I do recommend that at your leisure, you Google one or more of these different organizations and just breeze over some of that information to see if any of it will be helpful to you if you're involved in any of these niche markets. And having those designations behind your name always impresses the client. And if I could back up again, having those professional designations and affiliation also assist you with networking with other professionals. And that always leads to good information and experiences where you can learn without having to bump your head. Now we're getting ready to head into chapter 2, the manager-owner relationship. Hopefully as a property manager, you're a people person because you will deal with a lot of people. You'll deal with the homeowners, the tenants, the contractors, and you'll find that they're all different in one way or another, and you handle them differently. Some of the learning objectives here are knowing the differences between employer-employee and principal-agent relationships, fiduciary responsibility of agent to principal, the importance of complying with state laws, essential elements of property management contracts, and necessary information when taking over a new property. Now, in the type of relationship, there is the employer-employee type, where it's often a private institution requiring managerial services for their own property, usually responsible to officers or owners, employer institution, and with the principal occupant. Let's get some examples of this situation. And say there is a large apartment building, and that apartment building is run by an association or management company. They will hire employees to work for them to run this building. They have to report to a board either monthly or quarterly with the expenses, the repairs, and it's all focused around that one building, and they have policies and procedures that they adhere to. That's different from when you have an investor who hires you. You're not their employee, and they don't give you direction. You have a fiduciary agreement to them, which is not the same as an employer-employee. Excuse me, on the liability alert here, it mentions who has the authority to sign leases, the limit to dollar amount in the lease or length of the lease. Usually the property manager is already told what authorities they have when they're hired, and they know whether they can hire a plumber or if they have certain on-staff maintenance people that they have to use. They're already aware and have been told the dollar amount to lease the property out for the time period. Whereas with an agent, such as yourself, you may advise the client how much they could get for rent instead of them telling you. If you know that this property, the subject property, is in a neighborhood where all of the rents are 700, maybe the better property might be 750, but it would be unreasonable for a homeowner or a property manager to ask 1,000 a month if everything else is going for 700. So dollar amount is important, and the length of the lease. Traditionally, leases are for 12 months, and in some affluent areas, they are 24 months. Now, when it talks about type of relationships, there's also the formal, fiduciary, or trust relationship, where ownership is transferred from someone else or for the benefit of a third party. And on the liability alert here, it talks about special duties, the terms of trust instrument, federal and state laws, banking and securities regulations, and the U.S. Department of Labor. When they say that for the benefit of a third party, that reminds me of probate court, where a conservator of the estate has the authority to sell or lease a property or even leverage it. Also, if a homeowner is a ward of the state, or if the homeowners are going through a divorce, the courts may hire a realtor to sell it or a realtor to evaluate it on their behalf. There is a realtor in our office who was hired by a court to sell a property, and her name was just pulled randomly. The courts called her and said, "We have a property we need you to sell." And we listed it, and we tried to sell it. It didn't sell. But it was very interesting how her name was just drawn from a hat. She had no experience in it, but it was a very good learning experience for both of us. Okay, another bullet on the types of relationships, the principal-agent relationship. It is established by a written contract that's signed by both parties. That's a bilateral contract, meaning that there's two people involved, two people make the agreement, and that's what they're going to hold each other to, their responsibilities in that written contract. A management agreement is where the property manager acts on behalf of the owner and in certain situations and has the legal relations with the third party. You may only be managing it for a short period of time. It just depends on the situation, but they may have more authority to act on the behalf of an owner than in the principal-agent relationship. And again, there's a liability alert to discuss agent duties, the fiduciary duties based on the law of agency, and state licensing laws and regulations. Of course, the tenant should be made aware that it is the actual owner you're working for. A tenant may assume that because you showed them two different units, or that because you provided them an application or counseling, that you're representing them or their best interests. When in actuality, your fiduciary obligation is to the owner who hired you, the owner that you have a contract with. And state licensing laws and regulations do apply in property management that you disclose to the prospective tenant before they reveal any confidential information who you represent, because they may not want to reveal damaging information to you. Agency responsibilities. The scope of agency authority. As a general agent, there's a wide range of matters. It's an ongoing relationship. It often renews itself, and often authority to sign contracts like lease agreements or landscaping contracts. A special agent acts in a single manner, and it ends when the matter is concluded. You cannot sign for a principal. A special agent may be someone who's showing new construction or showing apartments for lease in a certain phase, but that contract could be over after they finish a different phase of construction or a different phase and filling it up. And it may be for a stipulated time frame, and they don't have the authority to sign or incur expenses. Other agent responsibilities are the fiduciary duties of loyalty, care, obedience and lawful instruction, accounting, and disclosure. The liability alert here says avoid commingling, know the proper accounting requirements, and you may not combine owner's funds with personal funds. Now, where it speaks of loyalty, it is important that you remain loyal to your client and not reveal their personal goals or their private information to a tenant. Um, Many times a tenant will ask you, well, can I have the owner's phone number? And you have to say no. Your loyalty is to the client who hired you to deal with the tenant. If they wanted you to give out their phone number, they wouldn't need you, and the tenant would never call you again. They would call the owner directly, and you'd lose your control, and they would team up against you. It's just several reasons you have to remain loyal to the tenant, to the owner who hired you, and not the tenant. You have to take care of the property. Perhaps you hired a contractor and then he left the thermostat at 90 degrees so the paint would dry, but then the owner incurred a high gas bill. Perhaps you have a situation where the tenant is having furniture delivered and the U-Haul truck wants to drive across the grass and ruin it. And that's not accurate care. You would have to say, would you please not park there like that? So you do have to take care of the property. It talks about the obedience of lawful instructions, accounting, and disclosure. In accounting, if there is some repair work that have to be done, you do have to provide those receipts and pictures timely in a monthly statement as well as an annual statement so the homeowner can realize what the return was on their investment. You have to keep up with all those disclosures and forms. That commingling means that if you store the money in your account, you're storing it in a property management account or escrow account, and you're not storing that money in an account where you keep your own money for your own personal things, but an account with your name on it, not your business name on it. Now we're going to get into the management agreement, and that's the agreement between the owner and the manager. It defines the relationship. It guides the operation of the property, and it's the basis for settling disputes. It's so many times that people think they're talking about the same thing when actually they just are talking and not necessarily listening. The best way to make sure that everyone is on the same page and understands the goal is to put it in writing. And that way, if anything goes wrong, you can revert back to it and settle disputes. A contract or management agreement should meet basic essential elements of a contract. It identifies who's involved, it stipulates the term of the service, and it identifies the responsibility of the parties. And when identifying the parties, you're going to put the company name, the manager's name, the owner's name, the LLC if it's in that, as well as the articles that says who can sign for the LLC. You'll stipulate the terms of the service, which will say, what is the compensation? What are the bonuses? How much do you get paid if you find a tenant? How much do you get paid if you have to evict a tenant? How much percentage of the monthly rent are you entitled to? And then you identify the responsibilities. So if it is the agent's responsibility to do repairs, it will be outlined. The owner may say, well, you are responsible for all repairs under 1,000, but if it's over that, you gotta let me know first. And the agent may say to the owner, well, I'll do all of your accounting and I'll do all of your paperwork, but you have to pay your taxes and insurance. So whatever the responsibilities are, it has to be identified in the contract. It may state that the property manager has to send the funds to the owner by a certain day of the month every month. And it may say whatever rents are collected, you must send it by the 10th of the month. Or if the tenant doesn't pay by the 7th, you have to serve a notice. It'll just have different responsibilities or things that are pertinent to make that owner's goals clear. When you have clear goals, it's easy to achieve them, and that way you continue to keep your client happy and get referrals. And that's really the name of the game. More property manager responsibilities. Have to keep the owner informed. Those monthly reports and disbursements really help to keep it organized. You may not need that if you're only managing one property, but many times you have one client who has 5 properties, or you'll have one client who has 3 properties. They may have 2 condos and 2 single-family houses. So you definitely want to have those monthly reports because we're not as young as we used to be, and we just don't want to rely on our memory. Even if you have an excellent memory, why tax it with trying to remember all those things? Write it down. Payments and other disbursements of funds need to be reported to the seller. To the owner. The authority to rent, operate, and manage the premises. Lease, collect rent, terminate tenancies, return security deposits, evict, legal action to recover lost rent. All of those things should be in the monthly report. That way, the owner will never say, well, you didn't tell me. I have gotten into a contract with the homeowner, and the previous property manager had did some things that they didn't appreciate. Once he spelled out to me what the other one did, then I know what not to do. And one of the main things they complain about is that they're not sure when the tenant moved in. They're not sure when repairs were done or if they were done timely. And if they're out of state or out of the country, it makes them feel like they're being taken advantage of. Well, that may or may not be the case. The agent could be here working very hard, but just because of their lack of documentation, it appears that they aren't handling things. If they're from another state or another country, they may not be aware of what things cost. I'll give you a very good example of a homeowner who I represented recently. She lives in Indianapolis and she has 2 properties here in Michigan. And one of them needed to be rehabbed after a tenant moved out. And the last time she saw the property, it was in excellent condition because she had lived there herself. But the tenant and their adult children and all of their guests really damaged the property. And the owner just couldn't digest that. So without pictures, she was assuming that it would be ready for the next tenant. Well, the pictures or the proof that it needed to be painted again, it needed plaster work, that the carpet was soiled beyond cleaning. Those pictures are what she needed to understand what I couldn't express to her in words over the telephone. Also, when I found someone who I work with regularly to give her great prices, I had a gentleman say that he would paint the whole house upstairs and down in this 1,500 square foot bungalow for $600. And this young man said that low price because 1, he's worked for me before. 2, it was right before Christmas and he needed the money for his small children. And 3, he knew I was going to call him again. Now, I could have just given her his name and number and let them work that out, but she would have felt uncomfortable sending him money because he's not licensed. She would have felt uncomfortable not knowing that whether he was going to do a good job or not. She doesn't know him. He doesn't have a resume. But the real thing about it is that because she didn't know the market for painters and their fees, she didn't understand that $600 was a good price. She actually challenged it and wanted to get other estimates, and the closest one came in at $850. But it took a lot of time and energy for her to shop around those other contractors to come back to the conclusion that my price was the best price. So she really, in the beginning, didn't even understand the bargain that she had, and realized that she should, you know, hire this gentleman right away because that's just a reasonably low price. So sometimes they're just not even aware of things that you do for them. Some of the
Even,
owner's responsibility. I'm sorry,
oh,
Erica.
yes, I was just going to say that even from if you're managing your own properties, just participants that are investors or plan on becoming investors, all of these things that a professional property manager would do, you would be doing this stuff mentioned in the pop presentation as well as other things, because you have to keep records. You have to make sure that when you purchase a property, you you budget for the property, you really look at the numbers, you look at your return on investment, you keep receipts, and you just really look at everything from a real conservative standpoint in order to make sure that you're maximizing your profits. And it is a lot of, I've noticed that a lot of times people love investing and they're able to, move fast, and they're movers and shakers and they're making money, but so often they would be so much more profitable if they would focus a little more energy on the organizational and paperwork side and implementing systems, because when you start moving into being an investor with multiple properties, you have to have systems in place because you'll be overwhelmed. You'll have to overthink every situation. And if you just make things easy and systemized and keep good records, document everything as we've been mentioning in the class, it'll be a better experience, less of a headache, and more profitable. And it's also good if you feel that you're good at fixing the properties up and doing the hands-on stuff, but you're not so good with all of this organizational paperwork things, then it may be good for you to hire a property manager. That's all I had to say.
Thank you, Erica. It reminds me that we need to know our strong suit so that we know what to effectively offer a client and not overextend ourselves in promising what we may not be suitable in doing. I prefer to work with a homeowner who is here locally and able to handle their own repairs. However, when someone is out of the country and I have to handle repairs for them or out of the state, I do charge a different fee because that is extremely time consuming. And it could be frustrating dealing with contractors and tenants and the homeowner. It's just another facet to real estate that you may or may not want to consume your day. So when we talk about the owner's responsibilities, we do want to clearly designate who does what as far as payroll, paying the contractors, paying the property manager, the insurance, selecting the insurance company, deciding how much coverage, dealing with redlining, Michigan Basic versus State Farm. I hear that USAA is the best. You know, there are certain responsibilities that you have with purchasing the properties. Does the investor disclose in the purchase agreement that they're an investor? If they're Fannie Mae, that's a Fannie Mae house, you have to disclose whether it's owner, occupant, or investor. Whether they're building new construction, who's going to do the advertising? Who's going to be responsible for outside leasing agents? Those are some things that you have to discuss. Who's responsible for what? You have scheduled payments and repairs and maintenance and other things that you have to designate who does this, who does what, so that everyone's clear of their role and everyone's happy and no one's overwhelmed. On the liability alert here, it says, beware of micromanaging owners. Employees of owner, not manager. Owner responsible for legal problems. Excuse me. The owner must carry appropriate insurance, liability and workers' compensation. Owner and manager named as co-insured. A lot of that information varies by state, but of course we're only primarily concerned with Michigan. When I say micromanaging owners, I want to elaborate on that a little bit. The owner is responsible for legal problems. Perhaps there is a workman's lien on the property. Perhaps there's a lawsuit or list pending on the property. The owner will be responsible for those things. And employees of the owner will be responsible for certain things, not the manager. You just have to designate who is and who's not. As far as management fees of an independent agent and managers, it could be flat or fixed or both. It could be a percentage. You want to discuss leasing fees, the early termination, and it's talking about liability alert again, compensation. That does not limit liability, and you avoid antitrust violations. For flat or fixed fees, there are some property managers that charge a flat amount, like $100 a month or $120 a month, depending on what their duties are. And then some of them charge the percentage we spoke of earlier. And as an independent agent, you do have the option to adjust that. My usual policy is that I charge 10% for individual for a single family house. However, if I have an investor with 5 properties, I may charge him 9% on all of them. If he bought those properties from me or had them already, may have some bearing on whether I charge 9% on the first 2 and 8% on the other 3. But whatever you do, you have to put it in writing. And everyone has to sign it and be aware of it. And that's factored into your accounting every month. Perhaps you have a property with an investor and they say they want you to have this property management contract for a year, and then 3 months down the road they want to terminate the contract. But what if you've already got everything set up with the landscaper and got a tenant in, and you've exuded costs that you haven't recouped yet? You may have an early termination fee. You may have a clause that say if they terminate the contract early that they owe you the next month, or that you have 30 to 60 days to send them the balance after you pay out all the contractors and do your accounting on it. So you definitely want to address the early termination. There are quite a few out of the country investors who just shop around and go from one property manager to another. And if you're kind enough to do a repair out of your funds before they have a chance to reimburse you, you could get stuck with not being reimbursed. You would have a hard time getting it back. And that's one of the reasons why I always advise that you have reserve funds set aside. That way you're never doing repairs with your money. There are some procedures that you might want to be aware of if someone had the property before you and you take over. I had a situation like that last year. The owner has to provide you with necessary information, maybe a list of the tenant's name, addresses, and phone numbers. Maybe they have an Excel spreadsheet that shows you where they are on the rent and how much they pay, whether it's a two-family and they're up or down, or whether it's a condo and they're at market rate or below market rate. The manager gets to work by setting up everything and notifying the suppliers, the tenants. You may send out a letter to notify all the tenants. They may have a different procedure on how they're going to pay the rent now. Perhaps the previous property manager drove by and picked up all the rents, and your policy is that the tenant gets a money order and mail it in. So that letter of introduction is what you spell out to the tenant of the new management and how things will be run, what phone number to call for emergency. And then you want to actually go out and personally inspect the property and take pictures. When you initially send them the letter, your contact information should be there so that they can call you and you can set an appointment. And they're going to be apprehensive because it's an unknown territory for them. So when you arrive, you use all of the courtesies that you were raised with by, wiping your feet at the door and letting them lead you through the house and asking permission to take pictures. And in that way you can see the condition of the property, take notes, and report it back to the owner. And then at that time you want to account for security deposits. You want to find out, did they leave a security deposit with the previous manager? Did that manager send it to the owner, or were they holding it? Are you going to be able to get it back? Are you going to be able to give them credit for that? When is the lease up? Can you see a copy of the old lease? You may have to start a new lease. You may want to change the old lease to your lease agreement that you're more familiar with, that has certain covenants in there that you're familiar with. But whenever you take over, it's a very interesting situation. You have to be very tactful as to how you handle it. Continuing owner-manager relations. In an effort to develop mutually satisfactory relationship, it's going to be communications through those monthly reports that the owner is expecting and will respect you for, determining how lengthy they are, how accurate they are, and professional. You want to try to have each monthly report the same as the one before. You have a template that you use so that it's uniform. You also may want to follow up with personal contact periodically so that they have an opportunity to ask you questions, or so that you can make them aware of certain situations. Perhaps the city is coming through and repaving the concrete. You want to make them aware of that. So there's a block club meeting, or something that the owner should be aware of, a new strip mall going up down the street. You want to have personal contact, stay in touch with them, keep them happy, so they feel like a human being and not just an account to you. And they'll always be pleased with your business. They'll renew your contract and refer other people to you. Your ongoing contract. The frequency is dictated by the owner, and it requires different degrees of tactfulness or bluntness on the situation. The way mine reads is that the property management agreement renews annually. If we don't say anything to each other, it just automatically renews. But also, it gives us the opportunity to reevaluate it when the year is up and decide if we want to change the amount. Maybe when I first met them, I charged 10%, and we've been getting along swell, and I decided to go down to 9.5%. So we could revise it. Maybe they have come to the conclusion that they're so happy with you, they want to give you an annual bonus. So you want to add that to the contract. So you have an ongoing contract, but it is bilateral, where you can both add to it or take away from it. You may determine that the contract that you wrote a year ago is not beneficial to you anymore. And so you just have to be open in how you adjust it so that everyone is happy and it's a win-win for everybody. Next, we'll get into chapter 3 in our next class. And we've finished chapter 1 and 2. And I want to back up and open up. Is there anyone who has questions or want to share an experience of property management?
I have a poll and a test that I would like to launch, and while participants are participating in the poll in the last quiz question, please feel free to come and bring some valuable information to share with the other participants in the class, because I'm pretty sure that we have some real life experience out there, and we learn from each other. So I'm going to launch the poll, and here we are. Okay. And we're going to have about 30 more seconds on the poll. I see that everyone really likes to deal with residential properties, but you guys are showing a little love to commercial, industrial, and special use. I think with so many people becoming business owners, it's really good for real estate agents to have a little experience in working with commercial leases. So at least when you refer your client to a commercial expert, you can kind of follow along and know what's going on, because that's just a hot market. Okay, I'm going to close the poll, and we're going to go ahead and launch the last test of the class. And you should see it appear on the screen. We're going to give you a couple minutes to finish it. About 30 more seconds on the quiz. Ms. Wilson,
Yes, ma'am.
when we end the quiz, I'd love for you to explain to the class give them an overview of what went wrong with investors back when the market got inflated and we ended up having all of these problems, because one of the goals of the ethical experts is that I want us to really make sure that investors and homeowners don't end up in the situations that they were in before. So give them information that they can keep in mind and pass along to friends and family, just in case the mortgages become easier to get and they start doing all that cash back and everything. Give them some
Okay.
so I'm actually going to go ahead and end the test right now. So you can go ahead.
Okay. That's a very good point, Erica. I really want to express that there are some people involved in real estate because it's their vocation. And there is a scripture in the Bible that talks about being good at your vocation and carrying out your mission. But there are some people who got into real estate only because it was profitable and not necessarily to help people. There were some people who saw our market as increasing in value, and they wanted to take advantage of that equity that was out there. There was a time where only homeowners knew what equity was. But eventually, investors and others found out what equity was, and they wanted to tap into it, even though they had not earned it. So it started a trend where people would overbuy the house or over mortgage the house in effort to get cash back instead of just to find a nice place to live or a nice place to invest in. Say you have a house on the market for 100 because the homeowner wants to sell and you've done a market analysis and you determine that the value is 100 and it should sell at 100. Well, of course, you want a little negotiating room, so you might list it at 105. But you know the home was valued at 100 and the homeowner will take that. That was the norm for most of the time, and when I first got licensed before the crash. But eventually you would get an offer for 130 when you're only asking 105. And you wonder, well, why are you offering so much? And they would say, because we want 100, we want to give you still the 105 or 100, and you give us back the difference on top. And they may write it up as a lien, they may write it up as a second mortgage, they may write it up as a seller held second and tear it up. There was a lot of creative ways that they could use to steal that equity. And sometimes they would actually bribe the appraiser to make the value come in at 125 or 130 when you've done all of your reports and your market analysis and you know nothing else is sold over there higher than 100, but for some reason it came in at the value that they wanted it at. And so many people involved in the transaction, the buyer says that if you don't go along with it, we'll just go get another house. And many times they did. I do remember my
Miss
manager
Wilson, you
telling me
know
that.
what? The computer is breaking up real bad.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I should slow down. There were warnings because it had happened before. Traditionally, real estate appraises and appreciates in value. But because there were so many false reports and fake transactions and stated income instead of verified income, it was a setup for a crash. And what led to it was just a lot of fraud. And that is why it's so difficult for people to get mortgages now because of all of the fraud that occurred right before and during the crash. Many investors were in the business of buying a house just to suck up the equity out of it and let it go right back into foreclosure again. Or a house could sell 3 or 4 times and no one ever fixes it up or takes possession. And it contributed to the decline in our neighborhood. Sometimes we wanted to sell a house and you couldn't. There's just too much debt on it to pay it off. And then short sales became popular. But what the crash came because there was just so much creative financing as opposed to the traditional. When our grandparents and great grandparents bought, you got a loan for 80% and you put down 20%. And that was just the norm. There may have been some extenuating circumstances where people put down more or less, like if you're a veteran, you may have a VA loan, you put nothing down. Or if you inherited some money, you may have made a larger down payment. Or if you had sold a previous house, you might put down more to keep the note low and the interest rate low. But there were a lot of things going on just so that people could get money. And that contributed to the crash that we had. And it also didn't help that our auto industry was failing. So there were situations where there were 2 people who made money in the household that contributed to the loan approval. But then one of them lost their income and the other person couldn't handle it. And there were situations where people were agreeing to adjustable mortgages where their note didn't stay the same, but actually went up if the interest rate went up. And it went up so that they couldn't handle it. And then it became a time where another industry started to fail, and that was the public schools, where they might have an auto industry person and another person in a different industry, and so therefore the income was challenged and
Miss
the note
Wilson,
went
we're
up.
going out so bad now.
Really? I'm so sorry.
You're giving away all this good information that they need to know, and it is doing like terrible cell phone reception.
Well, maybe the system is aware that it's 8:59 and that there's more to come in other sessions.
Well, it's actually 9 o'clock now, and let's see. Hi. It's actually 9 p.m. And Miss Wilson, the information that you just shared with us is so valuable. I think it'd be a great idea for you to start next week's class with that. So let's make a note to do that.
Excellent.
Now, I really feel that we all learned valuable information today, and this class is it's just a great experience in general, and I really hope and pray that a lot of the stuff that you learn here, that you pass along to friends, family, co-workers, and just let them know about bad situations that you can get into. And just make sure, because I feel that if people are more knowledgeable, when you're more knowledgeable and educated on subjects, especially real estate, because real estate is a part of everyone's life because we all need shelter. If when you're educated in this area, you're able to make more smarter decisions, whether you're an investor, purchasing a home, renting an apartment, in every aspect, because even if you're looking for a property to lease, it's good to know what to look out for and what to be aware of. So we want to thank you for participating. Thank you for your time. One of the main things that you need to do this week is read chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4. You need to review your property management agreement that we went over in chapter 2, and just become aware with all of the information that's in there as far as what a property manager would charge and the duties of a property manager versus the homeowner. And for you investors, I want you to see what the responsibilities of an investor entail and which ones you want to keep for yourself, and if you possibly want to pass those along to a property manager or a property management company. Another thing that I want you to review is the actual lease agreement that's in the class kit. And when you review these documents, take the time to read them. Get out a dictionary or use your smartphone to look up words that you're unfamiliar with, and just get a personal understanding of knowledge. And I want you to be able to explain these documents to your prospective tenants or your clients in a way where they're able to understand and you're able to make sure that you're getting yourself into wonderful business situations and having wonderful opportunities. So again, I want to thank you all for joining. Thank you, Ms. Wilson, for the wealth of knowledge that you've given us today. And good night.